Lush here at the Hub Pavilion in Copenhagen, and I'm joined now by SARAH SEVERN. She's the Director of Stakeholder Partnerships with Nike. Now tell me a little bit about why you're here.
Well, I'm here as part of a group of companies, actually, as part of a coalition called BICEP, which stands for Business for Innovative Climate and Energy Policy. And we were set up originally to try and get progressive legislation passed in the US. And so a number of us are over here continuing that work and trying to influence the policymakers here in Copenhagen.
Tell me first of all how it's going in the States.
Well, slowly. I mean, you can see we've had a House bill that's passed. We have a Senate bill that has been slowed down because of the healthcare bill, but we're optimistic that legislation will be passed. And we're one of many voices. There are other voices out there, obviously, calling for good legislation. So I would say it's going well.
Differently? Is it going differently from the US that it is while you're over here in Copenhagen?
I think the issues are different. I mean, when you're trying to get 179 countries to come to an agreement on climate change, you obviously have a wide range of negotiations. There's issues for the developing countries, and even within the developing countries, you've obviously got the least developed countries who have a different point of view. Much more complex, I would say. But the politics in America is also complex, and there's differences between what the House puts forward, what the Senate puts forward. Our agenda is really to say this is good for business. We believe that having legislation will level the playing field, particularly for people who've been early actors in this space and have done a lot to be as energy efficient and to reduce their carbon footprint. But ultimately it's good for business, but we need a price on carbon, because the limiting factor for many of us now is that we've done all the low-hanging fruit, and until there's a price on carbon, it's much more difficult for us to move to the next step.
And who are your colleagues within BICEP?
Well, we started with, there were 5 of us who were the founding partners, and it's a project of SARAH, which is the non-profit organisation that helps us organise. Timberland, Levi's, Nike, and Sun Microsystems and Starbucks were the first 5 companies, and we've since been joined by companies like The Gap, eBay, North Face, Stonyfield Farms, and a number of others. We have about 17 companies.
So it's interesting, you can imagine why, for example, Timberland might be in favor of because they're interested in the outdoors, they want people to continue to enjoy. For Nike, what's the kind of driving force behind your interest in this area?
Well, there are 3 key things for us. The first is that we're a global company. And the reason that we focused on the US for legislation is the understanding that to get this agreement internationally, the US has to take a stand. It has to have its own legislation in place. So it's really a lever for the global agreement. And being a global company, we have a wide-reaching supply chain, and that supply chain is at risk and very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, which
especially the ones in the developing countries.
Exactly, we're already beginning to see. So, you know, if you have infrastructure in developing countries, infrastructure in low-lying areas that will be threatened by the impacts of climate change, there's potentially political disruption because you have vast numbers of people having to move because the land they're living on is flooded. There's a whole host of factors there. The other thing that's really significant is for materials, things like cotton. Water scarcity is one of the impacts of climate change, and that makes it more difficult to grow cotton in certain areas, and that impacts companies such as ourselves and Levi's. Starbucks, it's about coffee. Mm-hmm. What we really believe strongly, aside from the supply chain pieces, we have a very youthful consumer. And this is about their future. They're passionate about the issue, and we believe we're doing the right thing in advocating for a new future based on clean energy for them. And thirdly, the area of innovation. I think there's fear about change. There's always fear about change, but we see huge opportunities. The number of businesses that are starting up in this clean energy and clean tech space is just mushrooming, and really presents a huge opportunity for job creation, which is really important right now in America.
SARAH, thanks very much for coming along to the Hub Pavilion here in Copenhagen.
Thank you.
SARAH SEVERN from Nike.